So today we're going to talk about a topic that many people have been asking about, and I think it's a topic that's just misunderstood. It's not that it's a very difficult concept to grasp. So we're going to talk a little bit about the origin of the oral law. We're going to talk about the Mishnah. What is the Gemara? What is the difference between the Mishnah and the Gemara? And we're also going to talk a little bit about the 13 principles of how Jewish law is extracted from the Torah. And this actually appears in the Talmud. So let's start at the beginning. So on Mount Sinai, God gave the Jewish people a few things. And it is from a verse in the Torah. Because also there's a big misconception, especially among Christians and people that are not Jewish, that believes that rabbis are making things up and, that there's not really sources for it. But there is actually a lot of sources for it. It appears in Exodus, in Shemot 24 verse 12. It also appears in Devarim, chapter 5 verse 28. What did we receive at Mount Sinai? God said to Moshe, "Ascend to me to the mountain and remain there, and I shall give you the stone tablets." And we know that we received this because that's the 10 Commandments. It's actually 2 tablets that's side by side. And the instructions, which is called in Hebrew Torah, and the commandments, mitzvah, that I have written, and then the verse ends, to teach them. We learned there was 3 things given. The Torah was given, the stone tablets was given, and mitzvot was given. And also God tells Moshe that I have written to teach them. So if everything was written down, then why do I need someone to teach me? If it's written, I'll read it and I'll know what to do. I don't need someone to teach me, which is a clear reference to the oral law. Not everything that we do is written in the Torah. In fact, most of what Jews do today is not written in the written Torah. I can give you numerous examples, and we'll keep the examples brief. It says 12 times in the Torah that you must keep Shabbat. It also says if you do not keep Shabbat, you should be killed. Now, it's a very severe punishment, but it doesn't tell us how must we keep Shabbos. It gives us a few things explicitly written. You shall not light a fire in your dwelling. You shall not gather. We actually learned that from a guy that's dying that gathered wood and transferred it from one domain to another. But there's a lot of other things that is not mentioned in the written Torah. Also for kashrut. Kashrut is mentioned 3 times to keep kosher. And it tells us we can only eat these animals, but it doesn't tell us how to shecht these animals, how to kill these animals. It doesn't give us all the laws of how we should prepare it. How should we make sure as Jews that we eat no blood? Jews are forbidden to eat blood. How can we be sure? Also, there's a clear verse in the Torah. God shows Moshe the Menorah. And he must make it out of a single piece of gold. He must hammer it out. So God told him, and this is in the written Torah, God told him, do as I've shown you on the mountain. Now clearly Moshe was shown something that we don't know because it's not written. And that is where the oral law comes in. And the oral law is not something that Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi wrote. I think that is where a lot of people get very confused. Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, after the destruction of the second temple, he was afraid that the oral law will be lost. So he decided to write it down in 6 orders. Also, that is why we call the whole Talmud, we call it Chas, which is the 6 Sederim, the 6 orders. And he wrote it down. He only wrote the Mishnah, meaning there is already an oral law in existence, which is what was received by Moshe from Hashem, may his name be blessed, but it was never written down. It was handed over from generation to generation. And you can see the link in the Tanakh. You can see that just before Moshe dies, a successor is chosen, which is Joshua in English, and he carries over the tradition. Joshua passes it over to the elders. This is also mentioned. The elders, who also is the judges, gives it over to the prophets. The prophets gives it over to the Ansei Knesset HaGedolah, the men of the Great Assembly, which is basically the Sanhedrin. They hand it over to Shimon HaTzadik. Now also what a lot of people don't understand is when this information was transferred, let's take the first step. from Moshe to Yoshua. Not only Yoshua got the information, Moshe taught all the elders, all the leaders of the tribes. So they also had the oral law. Yeshua is just the link in the chain until we are where we are today. And it is an unbroken link. And that is the origin of the oral law. So it's not something that rabbis made up later on. It's something that existed from the written Torah. It's not that they were separated. They were one entity. They were given together because you need the oral law for the written law. The written Torah tells you to put ornaments between your eyes and on your arm. But it never ever says what this is. Yet all Jews in the world have black tefillin with black straps, the same scrolls in each box. There's a clear tradition that's been passed over from God to Moshe all the way down where we are today. And now the question should be asked is, but there is various opinions in the Talmud. So first of all, what is the Talmud? So the Talmud, like I say, have 6 orders. But each order has subdivisions. So you get brachos, you get Shabbos, you get ketuvot, you get kiddushin. And it deals with everything in life, because the Torah is instruction for life. The Torah is instructions for olam hazeh, for this world, and what you should do in this world. And the oral law comes to explain the laws that's already in the written law. In the Talmud, and I made a video about the Talmud, which you should definitely check out, and I'll link it above, how to learn the Talmud. But in the Talmud, there's 2 sections. There's the Mishnah, and there is the Gemara. The Mishnah is what was written down by the Tanaim. Now, there was different generations of rabbis. After the destruction of the Second Temple, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, he was a prince and also the head of the Sanhedrin. That's why he's Nasi. Whenever you hear Nasi, you know he is the head of the court at that time. And he decided to write the oral law down in a short format. It's not like today where you had a printing press where you can print hundreds of books and have it behind you. There was one person maybe that had a book, and everyone was learning from that one person with his book, because number one, to make paper was a very big process. To write everything down by hand was an extremely long process, and then obviously to copy it from one Talmud to another Talmud was also a very lengthy process. Before it was written, before the Mishnayot was written, it was an oral law. It was something that people had in their mind because it was carried over from generation to generation. Something very similar to this is the Quran, which is the Muslim book, which we obviously do not believe in, because prophecy died after the destruction of the temple, and thus no other prophet could come, and that's why we don't believe in the book. And also the book doesn't contain a single prophecy. It's basically just copying our tradition. The Quran, the word Quran means to recite, because in the old days it's not like today. People had better memories because they had to have everything in their mind, because to write it down was a process. So that's very important to understand the time period that these things took place. Remember, this is 2,000 years ago when Rabbi Yehuda Nasi decided to write down the Mishnayot. What he did is he took notes basically from everyone, because people did keep notes, and he compiled it all together to form the Mishnah. Now the Mishnah is seen as the most authoritative in the whole Talmud because it's written by Tanaim. Tanaim is rabbis that's actual rabbis, meaning they had shmicha. Shmicha was a process where a rabbi, and you actually see shmicha from the Torah, where Moshe puts his hand on Joshua, and gives him shmicha, and he gives it over to the elders to a prophets, the prophets to the men of the Great Assembly, and so we continue. But there's a shmicha process, an unbroken chain. After the destruction of the temple, shmicha ceased to exist. There was no longer the process of one rabbi giving another rabbi shmicha. And the reason was persecution. If you were to do that, you will be killed and your student will be killed. And there's a law in Jewish law which is called pekuach hanefesh. When a life is at risk, then the whole Torah is suspended except for 3 sins. So, which is murder, sexual transgressions, and idol worship. You can basically do anything in the Torah except these 3 things. You should give your life. So, shmicha is not one of them. If someone says, don't give someone shmicha or I kill you, then you don't give shmicha. This is Jewish law. This is not to say that the tradition didn't carry over. Tradition still carried over, but the formal process of nominating someone and giving him shmicha ended. And that is why the Tannas are the most authoritative. Because they lived in a time of the temple and they had shmicha. After that, it was the Amoraim, the Gionim, the Savuim. It continues the generations. And in Jewish law, you cannot really challenge someone higher than you. So Amoraim can't challenge Tanaim. And the reason is very simple. Because the closer you are to Moshe, the clearer is your understanding of the Torah. So obviously, Yoshua had a much better understanding of the written Torah and the oral Torah than the elders. The elders had a much better understanding than the prophets. The prophets had a much better understanding than the men of the Great Assembly, and so it continues. And that is why you can't really challenge someone above you, because it's felt that they have a better understanding because they are closer to Mount Sinai. Now, basically, Rabbi Yehuda Anasi gathered all this information and he compiled the Mishnayot. Later on, the Amoraim compiled the Gemara. Now, the Gemara is a discussion on the Mishnah. Because the Mishnah was written so briefly with so few words, the Amoraim discusses from the tradition they received what this actually means, this Mishnah. And it's because a lot of the Mishnahs are not very clear. So, and there's often more than one opinion in a particular Mishnah. Let's do one quickly as example, just to illustrate. There's the very first page in the Talmud. So it's in Brachot, the very first Masechet. And it basically wants to know, from when can you recite the Shema in the evening? It's from the time when the priests, the Kohanim, partake of their Truma until the end of the first what? That is the statement of Rabbi Eliezer. The rabbis said until midnight. Rabban Gamliel said until dawn. This is all in the Mishnah. We're not in the Gemara yet. Then it goes on with a story with Rabban Gamliel's sons who was at the wedding. And they were very involved in the party, and they forgot to say the Shema, and they came back after midnight, and they said, no, we didn't say the Shema, what should we do? And their father, Rabban Gamliel, said, you must still say it, because you can say it until dawn. And they said, but the rabbi said you can only say it until midnight. And then he says, wherever the rabbi says until midnight, it means until dawn. So there we have 3 opinions in one Mishnah. And that's why you need the Gemara. You need the Amoraim to come and explain what exactly is happening here. Also a very important point, we learn no law from the plain text of either the Mishnah or the Gemara. Because later on, laws are derived from the Mishnah and the Gemara. That's true. I've heard many people say, but the Gemara is adding things. The Gemara is not adding things. The Gemara is giving context to the very brief things that is written in the Mishnah. And from this, laws are extracted. If you read something in the Mishnah, or you read something in the Gemara, or you read something in Rashi. So later on, there was notes added next to the page. So this is how a Talmud page looks like. In the center, you have the Mishnah and the Gemara. This is now first the Mishnah, and then the Gemara will follow. And then on the one side, you'll have Rashi, and on the other side, you will have Tosafot. Tosafot is basically the grandsons of Rashi. And then you have notes on the side of that, more modern commentators, and also the sources of where this appears in the written Torah. Many people think, unfortunately, that the Mishnah and the Gemara is making things up. The rabbis, took it from their mind. When people say this, you immediately know they never studied the Talmud a day in their life. Because whenever the Talmud mentions something, the rabbi, also Amoraim, will then ask him, where did you get this from? And then he will give the place in the written law where he got it from, or which rabbi he received the tradition from, so that you can trace the line back to Mount Sinai. So it is a very well set out structure. And the reason that I'm trying to make so clear that you don't extract any law from the Talmud is because there's things written in the Talmud that many people quote out of context, which is very problematic, because that is not what the Talmud meant. And I can give you a few examples. There's a section in the Talmud, which is chapter 5 in Bava Batra in the Talmud. This is a very famous chapter for very weird stories. The Rambam commented on this and said that anyone that believes that this is literal stories, like they took place, is making fun of the rabbis, of the Chachamim, and they're making Judaism look stupid, basically. So when we get into Midrashim, we're going to get a little bit deeper into that, because the Rambam says that these stories is to teach us lessons, morals, values, and things like that. That is why you got to study the Talmud, ideally with a study partner, ideally with a rabbi. You need to know that it's a big set. The oral law is a vast volume, takes 7.5 years to complete. It's like anything in life. If you want to learn something, you got to sit down, dedicate the time every day, and do a little bit every day. So I hope all of you have a great week ahead. Shabbat tov.